Grab your pitchforks, guys, because we're taking a deep dive into Bikini Bottom, but don't expect to find treasure. Instead, we're exposing a certain money-grubbing crustacean, Mr. Krabs. You see, this seemingly hard-working businessman is far worse than your average greedy boss. Behind those greedy eyes and that charming smile lies a criminal mastermind, the type who makes you wonder what secrets that crusty shell of his might be hiding. The truth is that Mr. Krabs isn't just miserly. No, he's a bona fide menace to society with a rap sheet longer than a pirate's scroll. So let's get our claws into it. First up, let's talk about how Mr. Krabs absolutely abuses his employees, starting with SpongeBob. We all know SpongeBob loves his job. You could say the little guy is almost addicted to flipping patties, like a fanatic whose only drug is greasy burgers and culinary perfection. But Mr. Krabs took that enthusiasm and twisted it into something grotesque. Remember that time he made SpongeBob work for 24 hours straight? Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just 24 hours. He forced SpongeBob to cook until he almost passed out from exhaustion, nearly falling face first into the frying pan. That, my friends, is forced labor. It's one thing to be a bad boss, but it's another thing to put your employees in a situation so brutal that it borders on slavery. SpongeBob was hallucinating, seeing giant burgers chase him around at one point. If that isn't a violation of labor laws, I don't know what is. And you think Krabs gave SpongeBob a single cent for those insane hours? Absolutely not. Zero overtime. In fact, SpongeBob was the one to pay with his sanity. And what about Squidward, the unsuspecting artist just trying to live his best miserable life? Krabs didn't just make Squidward's life unbearable in a "I'm your boss and you must work weekends" kind of way. He literally tried to get rid of him for good. Mr. Krabs was so intent on squeezing every last penny out of his staff that he once sent Squidward on a dangerous journey to the frozen north under the guise of a work trip, intending for him to meet his icy demise. And it gets worse. Krabs didn't even try to hide his intentions. When Squidward came back, frostbitten but very much alive, Krabs looked as disappointed as a pirate whose chest of gold turned out to be full of dirty laundry. Attempted murder isn't just crossing the line, it's dismantling the line and throwing it into the chum bucket. All this just to save a few bucks on payroll. Talk about being shellfish. But his villainy doesn't stop at the living. Mr. Krabs has even robbed the dead. This guy literally dug up graves. Yes, you heard that right. To snatch coins from the deceased. We're not talking about the occasional gold doubloon here. Mr. Krabs went into graveyards and took whatever he could find, desecrating graves for what was probably pocket change. He's like a raccoon, but worse. Instead of trash, he digs through someone's eternal resting place. In the eyes of the law, this is a crime called grave robbery. But Krabs probably thinks of it as a business venture. And it's not just his ethics that have decomposed. Clearly, he sees the dead as just another revenue stream. Speaking of revenue streams, Mr. Krabs was also caught red-clawed, stealing the Krabby Patty secret formula from himself. Let me explain. This bottom feeder concocted a scheme to avoid paying the delivery fees on his own product by accusing SpongeBob of stealing the formula. Imagine framing your star employee, a guy whose only crime is loving his job too much just so you can dodge shipping fees. That's fraud and false accusation rolled into one. He didn't just steal from himself, which is almost impressively pathetic, but he pinned it on the one guy who could never do such a thing. And did Krabs feel an ounce of guilt for putting SpongeBob through the ringer? Not one bit. Instead, he took SpongeBob's panic as an opportunity to lecture him about responsibility. The audacity.
Be you, SpongeBob. You stole me secret ingredient.
Audacity. Krabs even turned the Krusty Krab into a newspaper printing press, a venture that immediately went from local news to defamation disaster. He forced SpongeBob to write fake stories about their friends in Bikini Bottom, and not just harmless, fluffy gossip. These were slanderous lies that ruined reputation. Sandy Cheeks, Patrick Star, and even Sweet Mrs. Puff. They were all victims of Krabs' tabloid tyranny. He used his employee as a pawn, coercing SpongeBob into peddling lies, the kind of stuff that gets real-life journalists sued for millions. Mr. Krabs saw it as a get-rich-quick scheme, but what he really did was ruin lives, all to sell a couple of newspapers. And the most shocking part? He didn't even print a retraction. His crimes against SpongeBob didn't end there, of course. Remember that time that he sold SpongeBob a hat for $10? Turns out that hat was worth over $1 million. Instead of letting SpongeBob bask in his lucky windfall, Mr. Krabs wanted it back, and he was willing to do anything to get it. He went as far as convincing SpongeBob that the hat belonged to a dead man, and that his spirit would come after him. Classic Krab, using psychological warfare on a fry cook. If you need a reminder, that's called extortion, threatening someone into giving you something they legally own. The hat's rightful value was over $1 million, and Krabs knew it. So instead of letting SpongeBob profit, Krabs scared the poor guy into handing it back, snatching a fortune from SpongeBob's unsuspecting, absorbent fingers. If that's not the definition of evil, I don't know what is.
I'm not a
And
Shopping list! I'm a ghost!
And speaking of selling, did you know that Krabs once sold SpongeBob's soul for just 62 cents? That's right, less than $1. He pawned off SpongeBob to the Flying Dutchman, the ghastly ghost who had no good intentions for our beloved Spon. This isn't just poor business ethics, it's flat-out trafficking. The selling of a person, or soul in this case, to another entity is the very definition of human trafficking. Sure, it's cartoonish, but the real-world equivalent of selling someone's freedom for literal pocket change is beyond horrific. And all because Krabs was too greedy to part with 62 shiny pennies. He didn't even blink an eye, showing us just how little he values the people who work for him, or people in general for that matter.
How much money are we talking about?
Mr. Krabs!
62 cents! I'll take the money.
Mr. Krabs!
Let's move on to Mr. Krabs' treatment of animals, which is also nightmarish, by the way. Take jellyfish, for example. These innocent creatures are just trying to float around and vibe, but Krabs saw a profit opportunity. He began torturing jellyfish for their jelly to create a special Krabby Patty. Animal cruelty doesn't begin to describe it. Jellyfish aren't pets or livestock, they're wild creatures, and Mr. Krabs turned their suffering into a commodity. He kept them trapped, extracted their jelly in conditions that can only be described as torturous, and then sold the product to his oblivious customers. PETA would be storming the Krusty Krab if they knew. Krabs also marketed these jelly patties as something new and exciting, hiding the fact that they were born from a process that would make any animal lover weep. Mr. Krabs' love of manipulation even extended to Plankton. One time, he discovered that Plankton was deathly afraid of whales. Krabs then proceeded to dress up as Pearl, aiming to scare Plankton and drive him away from the Krusty Krab. Throughout the episode, Krabs consistently terrorized Plankton while disguised as Pearl, causing Plankton to live in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Krabs took immense amusement in this and continued the psychological torment for his own benefit, attempting to get Plankton to leave town forever. The idea that someone's worst fears could be exploited for the amusement of a sadistic crab was chilling. Plankton was on the edge of a complete nervous breakdown, but Krabs only saw it as entertainment. Emotional distress didn't faze Krabs at all. To him, psychologically harassing his business rival was just another tactic to get ahead. And let's not forget how he repeatedly tried to send Squidward on dangerous tasks, not to mention that one time he even tried to send Squidward to Mars. The reason? So that he could sell Squidward's belongings and make a quick buck. Attempted murder and fraud in one go? Now that's efficiency. Krabs saw no problem in putting Squidward in situations where his life was at risk, just because he thought he could cash in on a clarinet and some tacky paintings. There's a difference between wanting your employees out of your hair and wanting them off the face of the planet, literally.
Bye, Squidward!
And perhaps one of the most despicable moments of all, Krabs once choked a health inspector to death by serving him a contaminated meal. The health inspector came to check if the Krusty Krab was up to code. Spoiler alert, it definitely wasn't. And instead of cooperating, Krabs served him a deadly dish. Whether or not Krabs knew it would kill the man is almost irrelevant. The sheer negligence alone makes him guilty of manslaughter. But with the way he was snickering as he did it, it's hard to argue that there wasn't some murderous intent there. Mr. Krabs has not only endangered lives for profit, he's taken them. His desperation to avoid any kind of financial consequence led him to end a life. And did he learn from this? Absolutely not. So what are we looking at here? Forced labor, grave robbery, attempted murder, fraud, false accusations, defamation, extortion, human trafficking, animal cruelty, psychological harassment, and even murder? Mr. Krabs is far from a quirky boss who loves money a little too much. He's a hardened criminal whose actions reveal a complete lack of morality. He's not a businessman. He's a monster in a shell, hiding behind the facade of a lovable cheapskate while committing atrocities left and right. He sees everyone around him, friends, employees, animals, as expendable resources to be exploited for profit. It's easy to dismiss Mr. Krabs as just another greedy cartoon character, but the truth is he's downright evil. His crimes may be played for laughs, but the reality of what he's done, and would do again in a heartbeat, is nothing short of monstrous. Krabs will do anything for money, and if that means selling SpongeBob's soul, sending Squidward to Mars, or robbing a grave, then so be it. He's not just a greedy crab, he is a danger to Bikini Bottom and an example of unchecked avarice that shows just how twisted one crustacean can be. Let us hope, for the sake of everyone under the sea, that one day someone puts an end to Mr. Krab's reign of terror. But until then, keep your wallets close, your souls closer, and remember, this crab cares about nothing but cash.